Hello, everyone. And today we are here discussing a very, very important topic in macroeconomics, which is the simple Keynesian model. Now, the simple Keynesian model is one of the first things that we do in macroeconomics. So that means it's easy. It's easy, it's nice, and it gets lots of questions. So it's a great topic to do. And with me, I'll make sure that you are at the top of this topic and you know everything about this topic end to end. So let's dive into Keynesian macroeconomics, which is the simple Keynesian model. So now one of the first things to understand in what is the meaning of Keynesian economics. Now Keynesian economics generally refers to a type of system where optimal economic performance can be achieved through government intervention and through increasing aggregate demand through policies of the government. So government intervention could include increasing government expenditure, lowering taxes. You could do that to actually stimulate the economy. So when we mean about stimulating the economy, the most important application of this happens at the times of recessions. In recessions, when output is falling, that time you can increase government expenditure or you can lower taxes to boost consumption, which should boost demand in the economy and it should boost GDP. So Keynes is the one who advocated that when the economy is in trouble, then run fiscal deficits, which basically in simple language means borrow money. So borrow money to get the economy out of this recessionary situation. All right. So all of this was the first one to kind of propagate this and to bring this into the limelight was John Maynard Keynes. So Keynesian economics is a demand side economy, right? It focuses on changes in the economy in the short run. So we'll talk about both of this. What does it mean by being a demand sided economy? Now, Keynes said that we need to understand this concept of effective demand. Okay, so you can have demand, you may want something. That is called notional demand. When if I ask you, do you want it? You say, yes, I want it. That is notional demand. That means, but you are not committing to it. You are not saying that, yes, I will, given all the options that I have. So I'm not introducing options. Given all the options of goods that I had, given your constraint of income, given the prices, you are willing to purchase this good. That is not guaranteed. So notional demand does not come with a guarantee that this will happen. For that, the demand has to be effective demand. Okay. So Keynes said that actually the point where aggregate demand meets aggregate supply. So if I take a downward sloping aggregate demand curve, keeping in line with microeconomics, and an upward sloping aggregate supply curve, then the point at which both of them meet, this point is called effective demand. So this is the actual level of demand in the economy. Okay, so the point at which demand and supply meet, that is the point of effective demand. And that is the demand that suppliers have to meet. The demand that suppliers have to meet is this effective demand. All right, so that's the first starting point of Keynes. The second starting point of Keynes is that so Keynesian macroeconomics is based in a demand constrained framework. What is the meaning of a demand constraint framework? Now, when you think about the Great Depression, which is when this theory became famous. So when you think about the Great Depression, you think about excess supply, right? You think about excess output. You think about increasing unemployment, right? So these are the problems that time. So when these are the problems, the reason these problems are there is because of lack of demand. So that's why Keynes said that we are going to assume a case in which there exists enough productive or excess productive capacity. So there is excess productive capacity. In a situation of excess productive capacity, whatever is demanded can be supplied. So if you take an aggregate supply curve, if you put prices on the y-axis and you put output on the x-axis, then the aggregate supply curve actually looks horizontal. It's a horizontal line. Why? Because prices are constant. Why are prices constant? Any output between 1 to 100 or 1000 can be supplied at the same price. There is no need of prices to go up for supply to increase. Why is that? That is because of excess productive capacity. People don't have work. They have factories, but they don't have people buying their goods. So they don't need to increase their price if they want to sell more. So that's the concept that Keynes is working with. Excess productive capacity. Now here, aggregate supply curve is horizontal. And if I take the usual downward sloping aggregate demand curve, then this equilibrium is completely dependent on the position of the aggregate demand curve. So this is my equilibrium output. If this aggregate demand can be increased, then we will have an increased GDP. If aggregate demand curve falls, we'll have a lower GDP, which is what he says happens during the time of recessions. Demand falls. Demand is the constraint. Demand is the challenge. So whenever there is a problem of recession, this demand curve should be pushed out using the resources in the hands of the government, which is government expenditure and taxes. The demand curve should be pushed out and the economy will be back out of recession. Okay, so that is like the snapshot of what Keynes said. And this is that diagram which is showing the same thing. So now we are going to prove all of this and we are going to see how all of this actually operates. How can you shift the aggregate demand curve out? What is the way in which you have to shift the aggregate demand curve out? By what is the magnitude? कितने से बढ़ाना है aggregate demand curve को? Little bit, a lot, what is required? Right? So now we need to discuss all of those. All right, so now let's dive into the model. So the simple Keynesian model, hence also called the Keynesian cross, by the way, sometimes. The simple Keynesian model or the Keynesian cross. Let's go over the assumptions. Demand creates its own supply. So this is turning supply creates its own demand on its head. This is demand creates its own supply. Because whatever is demanded will be supplied, right? You saw it in the other figure that whatever is the demand, so will be the supply in GDP, right? So demand creates its own supply, not supply creates its own demand. All right. Next, the economy has excess production capacity. Aggregate price level remains fixed. The economy is closed. There is no export and import. Firms are assumed to make no tax payment. All taxes are paid by households. The central proposition of the SKM is that national output reaches its equilibrium value when output equals to AD. So these are the assumptions. Now, the basic ideas, we've already gone over those, but to just reiterate, Say's law does not hold. Short run is the price time period that we are looking at because we're keeping prices fixed. Markets are very chaotic if left on their own. They cannot self-correct because of sticky wages and prices. So this is a very important point, which is because it completely turns the classical argument on its head. Classical model said that it talked about laissez-faire. It talked about self-regulating markets. It said that when an individual does the best for himself, when an individual maximizes utility for itself or maximizes profits for itself, it together does the best for the economy also. So there is no need for any sort of intervention by anyone. And Pigou had said that wages and prices are completely flexible and they bring the economy, they keep the economy at equilibrium. Why? Because wages and prices move to keep real wages fixed. So real wages are always fixed in the classical model. So real wages are always the same and the economy is always at full employment. There is no need of any sort of outside intervention. But Keynes said the complete opposite. He said actually unemployment, disequilibrium, that is the norm. He said that there will always be unemployment or disequilibrium in the economy. Equilibrium is actually a very special case and will only come sometimes. It is disequilibrium which is going to be the norm. And if that is the case, then it is the government policies which will have to bring the economy up to equilibrium. Because inbuilt into the nature of the circular flow of income are leakages in terms of savings, in terms of imports, in terms of taxes. And these leakages will never let the economy, the circular flow of income be complete. There will always be shortage of demand. And so that was one thing that he said, that markets are not self-regulating. And the other thing he said that wages and prices are definitely not flexible. In fact, in the short run, prices are quite fixed. So none of this holds true, and that is why it is the government which can only bring economy into equilibrium. All right, so let's now get into his model. That what was his model and how did he think that the economy can work? So we are going to go into the so this is going to be a very basic model. The simple Keynesian model is going to be a very basic model. Why is this a basic model? Because this is like the starting point. It just gives us an overall picture, but it doesn't talk about every element in the economy. It is a starting point. Now, the first thing about simple Keynesian model is that it is a single variable model. By single variable model, meaning Y or output or GDP, that's the only variable. All other variables which are there, for example, prices, the rate of interest, exchange rate, everything is constant. So right now we are focusing on none of these. Right now the focus point is only and only output. How is output determined and what influences output? So we are only looking at one single market here. So this is only one single market, which is the goods market. We are not looking at the money market. We are not looking at trade. We are not looking at anything. We are only looking at what is happening within the goods market. What is happening with respect to demand for goods and how does it influence the supply of goods? The supply side of the economy also is completely we don't go into the details because we assume that supply exists. When there is excess productive capacity, what is the need to dive into supply? Supply is there. What we need to dive into is demand. What are the constituents of demand? How is demand determined? How do we increase it? How do we push it in times of recession? That's the question. So we are going to talk about that here. So we are only going to talk about demand. What are the determinants of demand? So we know demand comes from 4 sectors: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Right? So that we already know that demand is coming from 4 sectors. So aggregate demand is the sum of C plus I plus G plus net exports. Okay. So this is aggregate demand, or this is also called the planned expenditure curve. Okay, so this is called aggregate demand, or this is also called the planned expenditure curve. This is what people want to spend. So this is basically aggregate demand is a demand which links planned expenditure to different levels of income or output. So if income is this much, what is the level of planned expenditure? If output is this much, what is the level of planned expenditure? So it is a planned expenditure curve. Now let's talk about the different components of planned expenditure. So we already know these 4 components are there: C, I, G, and NX. And let's dive into the components in detail. So for the first component is consumption. Now, consumption is one of the biggest components that are there because 75% of our GDP actually is because of people spending money on consumer goods. All right, so this is one of the biggest components of demand. Consumption, the biggest component. What do we know about consumption? Now, consumption is a separate topic altogether. We will do a topic called consumption theories, where we talk about how is consumption in economy really determined? What makes us spend? Why do we spend? So consumption theories is a topic. Keynesian consumption function, which is what we are going to do today, is one of those theories. So we are going to today only talk about the Keynesian consumption function. So since we are doing his model, but that's not really the only theory which talks about how is consumption influenced by how much we earn. How do we decide this is what we want to spend? This is what we want to save. I think it's very cultural. Some economies, there's a lot of consumption which is happening. Some economies where very less consumption is happening. What determines that? So some way of modeling it, some way of putting it into numbers and figures and equations. So we'll do that. Today, we'll talk about a very simple consumption function, which is called the Keynesian short-run consumption function. And that is based on a very simple equation, which is this, that consumption is equal to, we can write it in many ways. The simplest way that I find to write it is C bar plus small c by d. This is the Keynesian consumption function. Let's understand each and every element because this is really important. Now, firstly, what is the C bar? C bar stands for autonomous consumption. It is the consumption level for income being zero. So even if you have no income, you are still going to survive on basic goods. That is C bar. So when income is equal to zero, consumption is equal to C bar. So C bar is the autonomous consumption, or it is the minimum level of consumption which is required to survive. Once that is done, then what you have is change in consumption because of change in income. Change in consumption because of change. Now, okay, what is YD? Let me first address what is YD. YD is disposable income. It is the income that is there to spend. So what is the relation between disposable income and income? Now, income is equal to, or disposable income is equal to income minus taxes. So after you've paid taxes to the government, if you pay taxes, what's left is disposable income. So change in consumption due to change in disposable income is small c. Now this small c has a special name, and that is called marginal propensity to consume. Right? This is called marginal propensity to consume. So this figure, this right here is marginal propensity to consume. Change in consumption due to change in disposable income. So now this is so we must remember that this is dC by dYd. It's the change in consumption due to change in disposable income. So this consumption function looks like this. C is equal to C bar plus small c yd. Now, if you kind of have to graph it, if you put consumption on the y-axis and income on the x-axis, let's say for now, in taxes are zero. Okay, so I'm just keeping taxes as zero for easier graphing. So this becomes C is equal to C bar plus small c y. Now, to graph this, if y is equal to 0, c is equal to c bar. So when y is equal to 0, c is equal to c bar. So this is c bar, the minimum level of consumption. Then dc by dy is small c. That means the slope. That means as income increases by 1, consumption increases by small c. So the slope is small c. So here we have, this is the consumption function graphically. It's an upward sloping straight line with a slope of MPC, marginal propensity to consume. All right. So this is the simple Keynesian consumption function, also called the absolute income hypothesis, where consumption is a function of disposable income. Now let's talk a little bit more about this disposable income. How do we really get it? All right, so here we have, what is this disposable income? Disposable income is income minus taxes. So disposable income is income minus taxes. We can also add transfers here. Transfers are some subsidies that you get from the government, which the government is giving you. So sometimes the government gives us also. It doesn't always take, right? So it's income minus taxes plus transfers, and that's called disposable income. Now, your taxes may be of two kinds. One is called the lump sum tax, and the other is called proportional tax, also called ad valorem tax. Okay, so lump sum tax is when taxes are constant, T bar, one tax, not dependent on income. Proportional tax is when taxes are a function of, it's a tax rate. So a tax rate is usually denoted by small t. It could be 30%, it could be 20%, it could be 10%. So when your taxes are proportional to income, that's called proportional tax or ad valorem tax. In that case, taxes are equal to TY, right? Where Y is income. So taxes are supposed to be a proportion of income. So taxes could be of two kinds, proportional or lump sum. So my disposable income is income minus taxes, whatever is the form of these taxes. It could be fixed or it could be proportional. So that was the first thing where we had to understand what is disposable income. The other is to understand a very important fact about the Keynesian consumption function, where the fact that when Keynes says that within the Keynesian system, disequilibrium, or within any economy, disequilibrium is built in. The norm is demand falling short of supply. It is built in here. How is that? Let's see. Now, the Keynesian consumption function is consumption is equal to C bar plus small c yd. Okay. Now, small c, as already pointed out, is marginal propensity to consume. Okay. It's dc by dy, right? But we can take out another aggregate from here. That's called average propensity to consume, C by Y. So I'm just going to remove this YD again for easier calculations. So C by Y is equal to C bar plus small c y by Y. So the average propensity to consume is the average consumption level of an individual, which is C by Y. So C by Y is C bar plus small c y by Y. So average propensity to consume is C bar by Y plus small c. Small c is MPC, and MPC is constant. Okay, so not putting the bar here, but MPC is one figure. So we say that MPC is something, but what is, if you look at average propensity to consume is falling as income is increasing. Why is that? Because you can see that as incomes are going up, APC is falling, right? As incomes are going up, APC is falling. Let's see that. If income increases, this whole thing falls, right? And with MPC becoming constant, APC falls as income rises. Now, this is a very important factor. This is telling us that as income increases, your average propensity to consume is actually going down. So you are consuming lower and lower, right? Your average propensity is coming down and down, right? So average propensity is falling as income is rising. So APC is falling. Now, this is what he's saying happens when income increases. When income increases, people actually consume less and lesser proportion of their incomes, which means if they are consuming less, then they must be saving more. So as income is increasing, saving is actually increasing and consumption on the average is going down. So average saving goes up and average consumption comes down. So let's look at this for a minute. So we can say that disposable income, which is income minus taxes, can be bifurcated into consumption or saving. Okay, so whatever your disposable income can only be consumed or saved. You cannot do any third thing out of it. Okay, you can either consume it or save it. As your income increases, consumption is going to fall and saving is going to rise. The rate of change. You are going to save a higher proportion and you're going to consume a lower proportion. So you may consume more, but proportion wise, it will come down. So this is what is happening as people are increasing their income. And that is why as income increases, they said there will always be, Keynes all said there will always be a deficiency of demand. All right. Now let's look at certain mathematical statistics. So we had APC is equal to C bar by Y plus MPC. So what does this tell us about APC and MPC? Which is greater? So APC is definitely greater than MPC and APC is falling. Right? So this is a very big result of the Keynesian model where he proves that the system is inherently unstable. Now, the next thing is that this is because of the way Keynes has designed his consumption function, where consumption is equal to C bar plus small c yd. If you remove the C bar, then this becomes a proportional function, where consumption is proportional to income. In this case, APC, which is C by Y, is going to be equal to MPC, which is DC by DY. In this case, we don't see that result, that when income increases, the average propensity to consume is coming down. In this case, that's not happening. It is happening in the case which Keynes defined is the standard consumption function, which is where APC is more than MPC and APC falls. All right, so important things to note. Then some other kind of results that we can derive are that if income is equal to consumption plus saving, if you divide all of this by Y, if you divide the LHS and the RHS by Y, you get 1 is equal to APC plus APS, where APS is the average propensity to save S by Y. So APC plus APS is equal to 1. And in a very similar manner, we can also do, if Y is equal to C plus S, we can also do change in Y is equal to change in C plus change in S, which means 1 is equal to DC by DY plus DS by DY, which means 1 is equal to MPC plus MPS. We've not defined MPS till now, so let's do that. So if income is equal to consumption plus saving, consumption can be defined as C bar plus small c y plus S. So you can get a savings function from here. Taking this to the other side, you get minus C bar plus 1 minus small c into Y is equal to S. So this is my savings function, and my MPS then is equal to ds by dy, which is going to be equal to 1 minus c, which is equal to small s, and this is called the MPS. MPS is nothing but 1 minus MPC, which is also what we derived from here. All right, so this is about our savings and consumption functions. Now, if we had to draw the savings function looks something like this, because the savings function is minus C bar plus 1 minus C into Y. So minus C bar means it starts from a negative intercept. 1 minus C is a positive upward sloping slope, and 1 minus C is nothing but small s, which is MPS is 1 minus C. So this also could be written as S is equal to minus C bar plus small s into Y. So it is negative intercept and upward sloping line. So this is like the savings function. The other things we've already talked about. All right, so we were talking about savings, and all of this we've done. So we've done this, and then we've talked about how it invalidates Say's law. We are going to talk about this here, and this danger of permanent over saving. All right, now let's talk about this second factor in the Keynes function, which is investment. Now, investment we all know what investment is. It is investment into new capital and machinery. Now, what is investment a function on? Again, there are a whole theory of investments called investment theories, which will be covered in due course of time. For now, we're just going to talk about what Keynes thought about investment. Okay, so again, this is just what Keynes had to say about investment. Now, for Keynes, investment is something which is a little unstable. Why does Keynes talk about investment being unstable? Now, Keynes said an investment can be a function of the rate of interest, or it could be a function of future profit expectations. So he said that rate of interest can be taken as a constant, so we can forget about it for now. But future is very uncertain. This uncertainty, he said, makes investment fairly volatile. By volatile, we mean that it could go up pretty fast or it could go down pretty fast, which we saw, right? That when economic conditions go bad, there's a tendency for investment to fall immediately. The FIIs would leave, the FDIs would leave, and people would stop investing into new projects, which is understandable. So he felt that if you look at demand and the components of demand, C plus I plus G, and let's say this was a closed economy, there's no export sector, consumption was fairly stable, a stable function. Investment, he felt, was very unstable. So then because of that, it became on the government to kind of bridge that gap, to lend that stability which investment could not. All right. So for Keynes, if in the simple Keynesian model, he took investment. Now, investment can be a function of, like we said, the rate of interest. You can also take investment to be a small function of income. So in the simple Keynesian model that we are doing, investment is either constant or investment can be taken as a function of income. All right. If investment is taken to be a function of income, it is going to be upward sloping. If it is to be taken as constant, then investment is this horizontal line, which is fixed at a particular level of investment. So investment is here, income is here. So whatever be the level of income, investment is constant. Okay, so that's why it is a horizontal line. So for most part, we take investment to be horizontal. The next component is government expenditure. Now, government expenditure, again, is a fairly simple function. Government expenditure, we either just write it as G bar, which is that government expenditure is decided by the government. It is a policy variable. The government decides how much it wants to spend. It can run a deficit, it can run a surplus, it can run a balanced budget. So government expenditure can be fixed, which is G bar, policy variable. We don't discuss on it because it really depends on the governments which are there. The other is that government expenditure can equal taxes. Okay, so taxes, like we discussed, two kinds, lump sum tax or proportional tax. So government expenditure, the way we model it, it's either G bar or it's equal to taxes. So G is equal to T or TY, or G is just equal to G bar. So very simple to model government expenditure. If it's G bar, it is this horizontal line. If it's TY, it's an upward sloping line with T being the slope. So a simple way to model government expenditure. The next is the rest of the world sector. The rest of the world sector is showed by net exports. Net exports is given by exports minus imports. That is called as net exports. Exports being a function of what is exports a function of? Exports is a function of the exchange rate. It's a function of price. What is the domestic price? What is the foreign price? And exports is a function of foreign income. All of these variables are taken as constant in our model. So exports is constant. Imports. So what are imports a function of? Again, what is the exchange rate? What is the price in the domestic economy, in the foreign economy, and the domestic income? Okay, so imports are a function of income. Now we say that let imports be m bar constant plus small m into y. So just like same like consumption function, where small n becomes the marginal propensity to import. Right? So m is equal to m bar plus small my, right? So if I take the net exports function, which becomes x bar minus m bar minus my, I can combine this to just be x bar because it's just a constant number. So x bar is standing for net exports minus my. So this is my net exports function. It's a constant or a function of income, x bar minus my. So net exports minus imports dependent on income. So that's my net exports function. This is only used if it is an open economy where exports and imports are allowed. But if it's a closed economy, we don't consider the net exports function. All right, so now let's map the simple Keynesian model. So in the simple Keynesian model, we put together the demand and the supply curves. Aggregate demand curve we've just talked about is the sum of C plus I plus G plus NX. Now we can put the individual components. Let's say NX is 0. So so aggregate demand would be C bar plus small cy plus I bar plus G bar. So this is the aggregate demand or the planned expenditure curve like we talked about. Now, the next is the aggregate supply or the actual expenditure curve, which is output. So aggregate supply, we say, is nothing but whatever is actually being supplied, which is output or GDP. So that's we have output on the y-axis, x-axis, and aggregate supply on the y-axis. So aggregate supply is equal to y. So if I do d aggregate supply by dy, we get something which is a slope of 1. So aggregate supply curve is nothing but a line, an upward sloping line with a slope of 1. A slope of 1 gives me an angle of 45 degrees. So this is a 45-degree line with a slope of 1. That's why the aggregate supply curve is. It's a simple upward sloping line. We are not modeling it. We're not talking about where the supply is coming from. We're just saying whatever is demanded will be supplied. And aggregate supply curve is just equal to output. Okay, we're not modeling this output. It's just taken as equal to output. So now we have the demand and the supply sides of the economy fairly, given, and we can put them together. So if you put the demand curve and the supply curve together, we get, they will intersect at one single point, which is called the point of equilibrium in SKM. So the point of equilibrium basically means the point of no change. This is a point at which once the economy reaches, it always stays there. Why is that? Because if you see here, let's say the economy starts off with a point of y1, which is less than the point of equilibrium. At y1, if we see the aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. If the aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, this means the planned expenditure is more than the actual expenditure, which is output. So people want to spend more than what is being produced. So you need to increase your output. Okay, this is the case where you have unplanned inventory decumulation. What is the word? Unplanned inventory decumulation. What does this mean? This means that whenever you plan demand, you plan for some sort of inventory. Investment includes inventory. If the demand is more than what you planned, let's say you plan to have 500 units of chairs as inventory, but you will only have 50 units of chairs in inventory because it all got sold out. So you need to increase production. So you need to increase your output to move towards Y star. Opposite things happen when you are above Y naught. if you're at Y2. Here, supply is more than demand. So you have unplanned inventory accumulation. You have planned for an inventory of 500 chairs, but you have 1,000 chairs. So you're going to reduce output next year. Okay, so that's why the economy moves towards an equilibrium. Once it reaches there, it stays there. That's the meaning of equilibrium.